We're going to go to business and branding with Keith and Kristina. And at this point, I'm going to go to the seated camera because I got my button sorted out here, Kristina. So I'm going to do the seated camera, camera. There we go. Yeah. And I'm going to have a seat and I'm going to get all official here. Oh, yeah. I'm going to take the sunglasses off and get all official. I'm going to look at my camera then. We're going to have a good chat about business and branding, the segment on the show where we talk about business. We talk about branding. I'm apparently a business expert. Apparently, Kristina's a branding expert. And we're going to give you guys nuggets just like John and Marty did on the gym. So where do you want to start today, Kristina?
How do you feel about that term expert? I think that's such an interesting term that not everyone is comfortable with. So maybe let's start with that. And then I'm Barbara Walters here. Yeah. They have let me loose. They being myself, I produce a show. They have let me loose and I'm going to interview you so people can get to know you. But first, let's start with that. How do you feel about that term expert?
I think it's an overused term, expert, but as cliche as it is, it obviously has value, right? Because it's probably the cleanest word to define who you are and what you are. So if you're an expert in something, it's a very intentional word. So whether somebody's labeling you an expert or you're accepting that word yourself, if you're using it with intention, I think it's quite powerful, Kristina, because you're saying, I'm an expert in this. And I think if I can lean into what we talked about earlier, if I'm an expert, I also believe that I have the confidence to tell you I don't know. Because if I don't know, I think it adds value to my expertise. Do you follow me?
Yes. So let's talk not about what you don't know. Let's talk a little bit about what you do know. But first, I want to set some context. We talk about this all the time on the show. You are a business expert. And a lot of people are like, he's a host of a radio show. One, we're not a radio show. Two, you're so much more than a host. So I want to get into that and I want to dig into that for our listeners. And I want to continue what makes you a business expert. But I want to start from a little bit of the beginning because you did a lot of things before you got to actually being an entrepreneur. So start the journey from what was your first real job and bring me, I know we don't have a ton of time, but bring me on a bit of a journey of some of the different types of jobs that you did before entrepreneurship. And then we'll dig into that.
Great question, Kristina. First job that I had a big impact on my life was where I worked in a grocery store for 7 years. And pardon me?
What were you doing?
I did everything actually. I worked on the floor. I stocked shelves. I worked in the dairy. I worked in the bread department. I worked in the deli. I made ground beef. I made steaks. I cut steaks. I actually did everything that has to happen in a grocery store. But what I learned the most from that experience, Kristina, was it was an independent grocery store owned by a single operator. It was a family-owned business. I saw that man show up. I saw that man, Jim Gaynor. Love Jim. He taught me a lot as a businessman. When he showed up at work, Kristina, he didn't park in the first stall next to the store. He parked in the furthest stall at the furthest parking lot. Why? So all of his customers had the right stalls, right? So he just taught me these principles. I'll never forget one day I got shit from him because I was sneaking out of work a little early. Not sneaking, but I was going, okay, I worked a 9-hour shift. I didn't take lunch today, so I'm just going to leave a little bit early. I'm thinking, okay, I put my time in. One day I get a knock. He's like, Keith, I need you to come talk to me. You're stealing from me. I'm like, no, I'm not actually. I'm putting my time in. He goes, no, you're leaving early. I'm like, no, I'm putting my time in. But he made it very clear to me that he thought that I was stealing from him because while I was not taking my lunch, I was leaving early. To him, that wasn't the right approach. Like, come talk to me. Come communicate with me. Come and be it. So he taught me about communication. He taught me about being honest. He taught me about respectability. He taught me about hard work ethic. He taught me about being humble. Kristina, it was Selkirk, Manitoba, a city of 15,000 people. It was a large independent grocery store. He lived in a very modest home, drove a very modest vehicle. He had everything because he did quite well, but he taught me about modesty and humility. So I went from that. I then worked my way into working in a hotel. I worked for a hotel here in Winnipeg for a number of years as well, where I learned sales. And I learned computers and I learned how to communicate effectively. And I learned how to convince people to buy things from me.
Wait, tell me, what were you selling? Because a lot of people could think hotel, sales, computers are the three words that you just used. And that doesn't make sense to people. Give people context of what were you actually selling?
It's funny because when you and I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, I said to you, when I first started at the hotel, Kristina, I was selling business zone rooms. And you're thinking, what the hell is that? Rooms that we take for granted today. Yes, listen, nation. Rooms that didn't have computers, rooms that you could actually buy like this rolling table, put a computer in your room. It put a fax machine in your room. It put internet in your room. So all these things that we take for granted, a business person would come to the desk and I'd say, hey, do you want to buy a business zone room? What's that? I'm like, oh, you get a computer in your room. You get a fax machine in your room. You get internet in your room. And it was new. It was like the 1700s. And I realized that I became good at that. I became good at asking the right questions. I became good at convincing people they needed a computer. But Kristina, I didn't know how to use the computer recruiter at the time. So I had a friend say to me, hey, I can teach you how to use Microsoft Word. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. If I can learn Microsoft Word and I can learn these Microsoft tools, I can then perhaps convince Tina when she comes to the hotel to buy these new rooms from me. And every time we sold a room, I got an extra $15. So I learned early, Kristina, that I was good at communicating. I was good at convincing you to buy the room. And then I learned how to love money. I was like, oh, fuck, every time I sell it, like $15, right? So
Right.
the experience in the grocery store, then the experience in the hotel taught me a lot about communication, taught me a lot about how to convince people, really. So that's what I did at the hotel, was selling business rooms.
Yeah, and like convince, that's an interesting thing when we talk about business, because I think we think that business is convincing people. And I think I
Yes.
actually know that you actually don't believe that. You don't believe in convincing people. You believe in providing a value based
Yes.
on what you know about people. And I'm the same way. And if it works for them and it provides that value for them, and if it
Yes.
doesn't, but there are a bunch of people over here that it does provide the value, then cool, we're not for you. But if there's a bunch of people over here that aren't really seeing the value that we think is intrinsically there, that's on us. We need to figure out how to make changes so that it actually provides that value.
I'm glad you said that too, Kristina, because let's keep the conversation going around business. When people say to me, I don't want to buy it because it's too expensive, then you clearly haven't provided enough value. Right. And I know that's so cliche because it's not about convincing somebody that's not expensive. Hey, Robert Coe, shaking my sales, brother. It's not about convincing somebody. You just haven't. So again, continuing my journey, I went from the hotel to Xerox. So back in the day, Kristina, the
What's
ultimate
for people that don't know?
selling fax machines and photocopiers and fax machines and office equipment, right? But back in the day, Kristina, Xerox was the epitome of the ultimate sales organization, right? So again, if we had Robert Coe on the line here, he'd be like, yeah. So when you were back in the 1980s and 70s and 90s, it was like, if you could get a job at Xerox, they taught you how to sell. And so I learned a lot from that experience of selling. And I learned very quickly, Kristina, it had nothing to do what the cost of the product was. It had everything to do with the value of what you needed as a consumer, as a buyer. And if I can answer your problems and solve your problems and give you the solution, you would buy from me. It had nothing to do with convincing you. It had everything to do with asking a lot of questions, understanding the value, and really not talking about price at all. Kristina.
That's like a lot of people don't realize that. And it took me a long time to realize that, especially when you're passionate about what you're doing and what you're
Yes.
selling, you think you need to talk. You think you need to describe. You think you need to just show them, no, this is the way it's going to work. In actuality, the best salespeople, very little. In fact, they do a lot of asking of questions and they do a lot of listening to see if what they have can be aligned with the challenges or the solutions that their customers have. What do you think about that? Is that kind of your approach as well?
I do. And as we wrap up this segment, I think I would leave a nugget on the table for our audience, Kristina. The greatest thing I've learned in the last 12 months has been starting this live show. And some would say, let's call it a podcast. So whether it's a podcast or a show, it has taught me how to listen. It has taught me how to listen more effectively than ever. And what tends to happen after talking with somebody for 45 minutes or to an hour? Let me rephrase that. You know what happens after listening to somebody for 45 minutes or to an hour and having them talk about themselves and having them talk about their problems and having them talk about trying to uncover solutions? When you are an exceptional listener, the trust that human builds in you, they're ready to eat out of your hand. When you're done having that listening conversation where you've been listening, and then you say, Kristina, I've heard everything you said. I wonder if there's something we can help you on. Immediately, the person's, oh, yeah, tell me more. So that's one thing I can offer anybody. If you're struggling with sales by talking too much, start a podcast. And I'm serious. Or start a live show, but start an experience where you're forced to listen to the person because you're going to gain a lot of experience that on teaching you how to sell. Kristina.
You did it with me when we first met the very first time. You asked me, you said, tell me something about yourself that I can't find on the internet and nobody else knows. And so you use that as a jumping off point to get me to talk about myself. And then I'm talking about myself more. I'm talking about myself more. And I talked for a while. Like I gave you the origin story. I gave you the journey. And when I finished, I'm ready for you to go into the details that I shared. And you said, the first thing that you said to me was, so people call you Tina. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I didn't even realize I had said it, but you heard in this one thing that I had said, wait, I know you as Kristina, you just mentioned somebody calling you Tina. And it like threw me right off because one, I'm not used to that. And two, like, I don't have a lot of thoughts on Kristina or Tina or whatever it is, but it was something so simple. And it proved to me in that moment, holy fuck, you listen. Because I just talked for a long time and you picked that out and then you brought it back to me. So I think it's little things like that. It doesn't take much to show somebody that you're listening. Repeating something back to them that they have said to you makes them trust you a little bit more. Do it again. Do it again. You meet with somebody one day, you see something that you're like, oh shit, they were talking about that. That might be interesting to them. Send them the resource, send them the link. Little things like that make people know that you're thinking about them, which they love, and give people value, give people resources so that when you're coming to them for something else, you're not asking for the first time. You're saying, I know you and I know what I have
Yes.
to offer. So I know that this will actually help you and you can be much more confident in presenting it.
Yes. And that's hard, Kristina. It's hard for people to do because we all want to talk, right? We're all like, but I got something to say. I'm really happy with my product. I want to sell it to you. No, actually listen and listen. And then when the door opens and then after you've sold it to them, then talk about the product because then all the work is done. But man, it's hard, Kristina. I have never been, that's why I'm offering to Nation here that if I can leave you a nugget is start a conversation, be it a podcast or be it a show. And again, Kristina, what I learned from that experience was it was as much the technical experience because somebody said to me, Keith, when you're cutting the show up after, if you're talking over the other person and not listening, we can't make good content later.
Yeah.
So it's that whole experience of listen. That's the nugget we want to leave you with here today. But Kristina, we've done it. We've hit our branding and business segment is done again today. We've got one in the bank yesterday. We got one in the bank today. We're going to do this every single day. And Business Athlete Nation, there's a podcast of this experience on YouTube. It's going to make its way over to Apple and Spotify and everywhere else. But right now, we got a podcast on you, which is Business and Branding with Keith and Kristina. If you've missed the live show, every single day, we got 12 to 14 minutes of nuggets to help you guys achieve success in business and achieve success in branding. Kristina, it was fun today.
It was fun. Listen, I want people to know also that we're not just talking about these things that we're saying have come from real experiences. We've done some shit and there's a lot more that we all have to learn about what Keith has done here too, but we've done some shit. And with that, we think that we can lend you some advice and some tips that might help you on your way. If you can learn a lesson from a mistake that I've made and you don't have to make that mistake yourself, or you can just do it a little bit sooner than I did, that's my job done.
That's it. That's exactly it. So we're going to wrap the show up. I know it was a short little segment. We're going to keep getting better at this. And it's funny because I'm going to tease my friend Kristina here. When we started this thing, I know Kristina likes to have things prepared. And I'm like, we'll figure it out. And I'm certainly after the show, I didn't get much out of you today. That's okay. We got 12 minutes in. I'm going to get 12 minutes tomorrow.
Not good about today. For me, if all we get is story, the way that people connect to story, it's an entirely different vibe.
Yes,
so I
true.
feel today.
Good. Awesome. I had a great show. This is a great segment. We invite you guys back. Like I said, this is we do this every single day at 8:49 Eastern time or so. Business and Branding with Keith and Kristina. And then of course it's a podcast as well that lives on YouTube and all the other platforms. You guys can take it with you on the go. But we're going to get out of here. We're going to get on with our day. She's got an awesome big Thursday to prepare for. She's going to get to. I got they got post-production to happen here now. But we're going to see you guys back. Shinku, we went longer, man. We're already 3 minutes over time here, Shinku. So I love you, brother. And Shinku's from LA. So we're going to get Shinku in the second segment, Kristina. So Shinku doesn't have to get up too early. Good time saying thank you. Awesome. Appreciate you. Good time. Thanks for tuning in every single day. We'll be back tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern time with Keith, Kristina, John Anderson, and C. Marty Finn and Kristina. We got Rich Ingram tomorrow joining the show, and Robbie Brighton is supposed to join us as well. One of Rich's colleagues, friends, coaches, intense endurance athlete. We're talking endurance tomorrow, mornings in the lab. Let's get out of here, Tina. See you guys.